remember his name, don't want to, but he took all the money that the students put into all the machines, and we couldn't get any money out of him. He was using it for faculty and this, that, and the other. And I said, if I'm elected, we'll change that. And went to see Dr. Phil Hoffman. He said, well, you've got all of them talking about it. Said, you're not just running for student body president, you're running against my faculty over here. And I said, well, that's fine. I wanted to be a fair fight. I had to go see him because I wanted to get a list of all the people there on the GI Bill. I was on the GI Bill. So I got those, and as before faxes, and you mimeographed everything, and I wrote them all a letter, said, here's what's going on. We need your votes. Here's our slate. And we ran a slate, and on election day, we won every damn office. And everybody was kind of looking around saying, what happened? So that put us in a position where we were running the school. Meanwhile, Mickey had closed down Wheeler Avenue. He said he didn't want any traffic through the campus. So we had all these guys that were working downtown, and they cut through Wheeler because that's the only way to get to U of H, because the Gulf Freeway was clogged worse than it is now. So one of my guys got pulled out of the car, and it beat him up pretty bad. And so they had another confrontation, and the guy knocked down one of the people trying to get him, just sped through in his car, knocked some kid down, hurt him. So there was, brouhaha about that. And I picked up the phone and called over there. And I said, are you the Mickey Leland that's the student body president? And Mickey was in his dashiki elephant tail fly swatter period, had his little round cap on. He was playing the part. And I had not seen him in a while. And I said, he said, well, we've shut it down. You just tell your people not to be coming through there. I said, well, Mickey, let's sit down and talk about it. I need to tell you, he said, okay. So we set up a meeting. So several of the guys at U of H Law School, we had a pretty good flag football team. Everybody had played in the Southwest Conference, and 3 or 4 of them were playing pro ball, and Don Truill was our quarterback. He was playing for the Oilers, or had played for the Oilers. So we had a pretty salty bunch of boys. So I got 3 of my linemen that were playing pro ball and took them with me because I knew how Mickey thought. And I didn't know Benny was going to be there. And I go in, here's Benny Reyes there, Craig Washington, Mickey's there. And he said, let's just shut it down. We can't have that. And I said, well, we're not making a political statement about this. You let your students drive through there. Why can't you let our students that have a student sticker on it, kind of students honoring each other, because our campus and bud, we'll have other issues we need to deal with, and we need to be able to work this out. He said, well, you've had my final word about that. Benny says, could y'all excuse us for a minute? We need to call, because Mickey was obviously upset. And they leave, and they came back in. Mickey said, well, I've been thinking about what you said, Jack, and we're going to work this out. As long as your people have a student sticker identifying them as a student at U of H, we'll allow them to pass just like we do our students. I said, it's mighty generous of you. And the meeting was adjourned. We had no more problems. Now, flash forward to, I don't know, several years later, I had left to practice law. I was building 3D International, and we acquired a company in Austin. Brooks, Barr, Graber, and White. Max Brooks was very close to President Johnson, and he was the architect for the Johnson family. That's how we got the LBJ Libraries Commission, which was a very prestigious commission. And so I get a message to meet Frank Irwin, who was the big man on campus at UT and ran everything. He wanted to talk to me, and Frank had most of his meetings in various gin mills, and the old Quorum Club is where he was holding court. And I came walking in, I looked up there, and there's Mickey and Benny and all those guys. He said, y'all met before? And, it's like old home week. And he wanted us to meet. He and I met for a few minutes, and got what we were doing out of the way, and concerning that merger, he was advising the company we acquired. And we all had scattered to go. I said, before we go, I said, Benny, Mickey, I got to know, we had that thing at TSU and y'all left the room and then you came back and everything was worked out. They looked at each other and laughed. And Mickey said, go ahead and tell him, Benny. Benny said, well, I told him, said, he had been in Vietnam. And he said, all those crackers, they're holding. And said, nope, cover your ears. Those MFs will shoot your ass dead if you start trying to pull them out of the car. We don't want to go there. So while we worked that thing out, Jack was talking about those stickers. And that's how that deal came to pass. Benny intervened before there was bloodshed. But I had told him, I said, our guys aren't making a statement. They're just guys with families trying to get an education so they can improve themselves. Now, give me some rules we can live with, but don't tell me we got to, because they can't get off work any earlier to get out there to night school, and the only way to get there. So it was just a funny aside. But so we came out of law school and graduate school knowing each other, having a mutual respect, and had cooperated on solving problems. That's what Mr. Mack wanted, is a group of leaders that knew each other and could get things done behind the scenes. So one day, Walter Mischer and George Brown took me to lunch. They said, we understand you're close to Mickey Leland. And Mickey was he was an outlaw. I said, you explain to that dumb blankety blank that every time he votes against the oil industry and it contracts, the first people that get laid off are his constituents. And so he's giving a vote to a bunch of Yankees. They don't give him any votes on anything he's trying to get done. So why in the hell does he keep cutting off that and tell him who to meet and what to say and how to navigate? So Rodney came to see me, and I said, well, Rodney, we negotiated. I said, I'll help you, but on some conditions. You're going to have to listen. You got a lot to learn. Oh, yeah. I said, now, we're going to teach you how to raise money. Okay, how do you raise money? I said, tell me what your pitch is. He went into the thing, took about 20 minutes to get it out. I said, the people I'm sending you to see are not going to listen to you for 20 minutes. I said, we need to get this down to where your pitch is under 3 minutes. And we honed on it and got it down. And he said, okay, now. I said, you got your pitch down. He said, then what do I do? I said, nothing. He said, what do you mean nothing? What if they don't do anything? I said, just sit there and look at them. He said, you just sit and look at them? I said, you just sit there and look at them. So the first person I sent him to see was Walter Mischer. I talked to Walter, told him what was going on. And I said, he's going to make his pitch. And then he's just going to sit and look at you. He started laughing. He said, that's a good approach. He said, how long do you want me to look at him? I said, you're in charge, Chief. So he goes out there, and that was before cell phones. Rodney comes down. He calls me. He said, I just got a check from Walter Mischer. I said, it's wonderful. I said, how much is he? He said, I can't. I said, I'm afraid to open it. I said, well, open it whenever you get ready. I'd be curious what he gave him. He said, God damn. I said, is it a good one? He said, far beyond my expectations. So I said, well, now you know how to raise money. And I had him set up with 4 more calls where I, told him what was going on. And it was the players, so he started off, and there was a big field till we filed that first finance report. And everybody looked at that and said, son of a bitch, it wasn't just how much he raised, but who he raised it from. And he's had the wind at his back ever since. But that's because of Mickey. And Rodney has been a good public servant, a great public servant, in my opinion. I get some heat on my side of the aisle from, why are you helping so and so and so and so? And I said, because you can disagree with a man or a woman without being disagreeable. And no matter what, you need to communicate. And I learned that Dad, Mr. Mack, when I was just a boy, they'd talk about, well, so-and-so's going to oppose this, that. Dad would talk to one side. Mr. Mack would talk to the other side. They'd find where a consensus could be found, how to do it. They cobbled it together. The things that I learned there is the same things I've been applying ever since through life. I don't always agree with Rodney. I didn't always agree with Mickey or Benny, but they have constituencies, and politics is about the art of the possible. And I would remind everyone that during the turbulent 60s, we navigated it pretty well here in Houston as compared to other cities. Major cities had riots, burned down. The nearest we came was when a police officer got shot at TSU, and he may have been shot by one of his own guys. So, and that when that information got out, everyone seemed satisfied and calmed down. But I'm proud of the fact that we accomplished what we did in this city without any major riots. There's been some dark chapters. It's in that spirit, we've tried to engender and carry on, and I'm just spreading Mr. Mack's gospel, one of his disciples. If you look at Mickey's legislative history, when he first went up there, he did not get a lot passed. They have an expression up there referring to people as being housebroken. In other words, you go through the House representatives and you learn that you have to go along to get along. There's a lot of trading and swapping back and forth. And Mickey, as a young man, was righteous. It was the right thing to do, and God was on his side, and he was going to fight evil and preach at everyone. Well, everybody just says, really, goes on about their business. And, at the end of the session, you're sitting there and, you got what the little boy shot at and nothing else. And you can't feed your constituents off of that. And I'm not trying to say it was because of me that a lot of people had a vested interest in seeing Mickey succeed. I certainly did because of our friendship. But my job for Bill was to round up coalitions, and people were always amazed when Leland and some of his colleagues would come in and vote for something that we were doing. But all I would do is, they said, well, he's buying them off. Not at all. What I was doing was pointing out where his interests were aligned with whatever they were trying to do. Blacks have historically been used. You know that. And I think they're still being used today. I'm critical of much of the Democratic Party because they take the blacks for granted. The blacks are loyal, vote with them in lockstep, and then they get what the little boy shot at. They're just, they're sucking hind tit when it comes time to everybody get fed. And it's not right. And all I did was counsel Mickey and others on how to improve their leverage and their position, which benefited, my mind, what he was trying to get done. And Mickey, it didn't cost him anything. It didn't hurt his constituents, but it improved his leverage with people. When he needed help on something, I could go to somebody and say, hey, you remember when we did this, this, and this, and that situation's going to come up again. Now, he's looking for help here. And the guy that's opposed him has an R behind his name, but he's a son of a bitch, and you and I both know it. And he screwed us on this, that, and the other. And the governor would say, I got it. Go do your thing. And Mickey learned how that game was played, and he applied that in Washington. Washington, there was lots more of that. They were more subtle in Washington. His first term up there, he got taken in. Uh, it's kind of like when wars come. The old politicians make the speeches, and young men go out and do the fighting and dying. And Mickey was passionate and a true believer, and he did a lot of fighting and did a lot of dying till he got smarter in his later years, and then he got a lot of things done. It's just, I'm not trying to defend the system. I'm telling you, it exists. It's there. Now you can either beat your head against the door, or you can figure out how to pick the lock and get in. Well, Mike Hanna taught me many things, but one of the greatest to us lessons is what power is and how to use it. And you got to remember, he was a black man in the 50s and 60s that had the odds stacked against him. He had to play the game and be subtle. When I was a boy, there were two restroom doors, black and colored and whites. Same thing on the drinking fountain. Schools, everything was segregated. You went to the movie theater in East Texas, and there was a movie theater, and then there was a stairway going up the back with a balcony, and that's where the colors sat. Now, in that world, and if that's how it is publicly, you can imagine how it is privately. And Mr. Mack acquired power and knew how to use it and got things done that people would have thought impossible. Mickey came along in a different phase in a different time where demonstrations, confrontation, lunch counter sit-ins, those kind of things became tactics that could work because they created a focus of attention, and a lot of people that hadn't paid a lot of attention, would say, well, that's not right. Because I grew up in East Texas and then Port Arthur and went to Texas A&M. But when I was a young man with Prudential, they had me in Temple, Texas. And they had one public swimming pool, and blacks couldn't use it. And I was vice president, going to be the incoming president of the JCs there. And I said, we need to take a stand on this. That's not right. And we passed a resolution and organized pickets to go down to the public pool. Well, all those young men, they were in daddy's business, Daddy owned a car dealership, owned a lumber yard, was a developer. Homes out there got on this. What in the hell do you think you're doing? Well, then they wanted to bring it up. I said, now we're going to be the kind of club that, cuts and runs when the first shot's fired. Or do you think, were we right or were we wrong? If we're right, let's stick to our guns. And, you may have to tell Daddy that he's got to understand the times they are changing. And, take him home a copy of what he's singing that to him. And so we made some changes back then in our generation. And that's when Mickey came along in that period of time. But had not Mr. Mack plowed the ground that he had and taught the lessons, Martin Luther King, if you go back and read his books and what he had to say and what he did, he and Mr. Mack would, been like hands and gloves. And that was, it's one thing to preach and lecture. It's another thing to figure out how to get things done. Now, I admire people that got out and confronted and got their heads busted. But as General Patton said, I don't want you to die for your country. I want that other son of a bitch to die for his country. Said it's about winning here, not about, being brave and charging machine gun nests. Figure out a way to flank them and lob a grenade in there. Let that grenade do the talking for you. He didn't really live comfortably with it, to be honest. Mickey saw himself, and in his heart was a warrior for what he believed in. And he was always uncomfortable. It's like, I'm talking to the enemy. I said, Mickey, have you ever been to a sausage plant? If you go to a sausage plant, you'll never want to eat sausage again. Now, you've chosen politics as your avocation and your vocation, and you're going to have to learn how sausage is made and get over being squeamish about it. And there, Mickey had a hard time. That was the biggest hump for him to get over. I'd be sitting next to him, and you'd look over at his old, his hands getting, I could see white all over his knuckles where he's hanging under his leg, and you could look at his cheek, and you can see muscles flexing up there. Mickey's basic nature is he liked people, and people liked him. Mickey, I enjoyed his company, and he was just a fun guy to be with. Yeah, and he could crack me up, and we'd talk about people we were dealing with on both sides of the fence and talk candidly about them. Players, it's like when you play football or basketball or whatever. When you're out there on the court, you're just trying to beat each other's brains out. But that's the same guys you go out and have a beer with later, and there's a camaraderie among players.
Right.
It's the same way it used to be in politics.
Mike.
Did you see as your mic?
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Let me use this one. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Barbara Jordan Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs here at Texas Southern University. Today, we're celebrating Mickey's 77th birthday, which would have been on the 27th of November. And because of the virus and all of the things going on where students now take exams in virtuality, it's very few people on the campus, plus it's graduation week and final exam week. But one of the things we wanted to do, there have been several videos made over the years on Mickey Leland, but nothing was brought out as far as how do you make it a teaching experience. For example, many people have heard that Mickey created what we know as drug substitution, generic substitution of drugs for the formal one that's more expensive. Well, he did that. And when he did it, he was called a communist because at that time, socialized medicine was something that the Russians would do or the Nazis would do. It wasn't an American position to take when it came to helping people. Mickey threw all of that out and created generic drug substitution. But guess where he did it, where it all started at? Right here on Texas Southern's campus. And so we want to remind the public and the people what the value of Mickey is to Texas Southern and the value of Texas Southern to the greater Houston community, the state of Texas, and the world. Today, I have a person, his name is David Petronella. David was just a young kid, and Mickey was putting together his congressional race. He wanted opinions from everybody. So when you had a meeting late at night in his campaign office, he would have somebody there from the bourgeois in the black community. He would have some regular people from 5th Ward and 3rd Ward and 4th Ward. He'd have some conservative whites, some liberal whites. He'd have gay people there. He'd have he'd have union people, laborers, and he would have elected representatives. But one of the most unique people at these meetings was a guy named David Petronella. He was a teenager. And so all these adults would be in the room, and here's David sitting there, and Mickey enjoyed pulling from that kind of environment. It's like going in the woods. You just don't see one brand of tree or one kind of plant. You see a whole menagerie of plants. And that's what makes life work. But now we have polarizations where you have this group of people and that group of people, and nobody's willing to compromise and work together. So, David, what made you decide to work with Mickey Leland?
Well, I guess I first met the congressman when he was a state legislator back in 1976. I was 18, and for anybody, when you first meet Mickey, he looks you in the face and he listens to what you have to say. He had such an incredible touch. And I was at the University of Houston. I was a freshman and 18, and had gotten involved with Young Democrats, and we had helped. Congresswoman Jordan was running for her last campaign, doing her last campaign. Jimmy Carter was running for president, and this was after all Watergate and everything had gone through, and it was an exciting time. So I got involved then, and so I knew, and I watched Mickey in the state legislature. I'd gone up and watched from the balcony when we. Having served up there. So I was in the balcony and I watched him, and he had this innate ability to be able to, he'd have the dashiki on it sometimes, but he could go, and he developed the ability to get some of these rural legislators who, very conservative folks, didn't realize often that they had diverse constituency, that they had African American and Hispanic, low-income Anglo constituents, got them to see that it was in their interest to vote for things that he was concerned about, like the drug issues. And Mickey started here as a pharmacy student here at Texas Southern, so he brought that expertise. But he also worked. One reason why AFDC was increased was because of work that he did working with Craig Washington and others at a time where it was just unheard of that you'd be able to get these increases through a very conservative legislature. So I saw that, and in 1978, when he decided to run for Congress, I knew I had to help out. So I'd be there. I got to meet Bertil and then back. And when I was a undergrad at U of H, I would work 2 or 3 jobs to pay for schooling. And so I'd leave the last job sometimes at 8 or 9 at night and go over and work at the headquarters. And I used to joke that sometimes Mickey wasn't always so good for my love life, because I'd have a date like that night and I'd say, listen, before we go out, have dinner, I've got to put these signs out in the Heights for Mickey Leland. And so I know it's a little exasperating to explain to your girlfriend at the time, I've got to do this. But he was the kind of person that motivated you and wanted you to do those things. And like Bertil said, when we would be there sometimes late at night, you'd have a melange of all of Houston. You would have people from every walk of life, because Mickey moved them and motivated. And I've never seen anything like that. Gave me confidence that we as a society could move forward, because Mickey had just that incredible ability. I know you were hearing from Jack Raines up here. Jack's a Republican. And Mickey could talk to Republicans. And oftentimes, if they didn't agree on everything, he'd still get them to at least understand what needed to be done. So that's how, I guess in 1978, that campaign was incredible. He brought people from all parts of the congressional district together, and just phenomenal victory for the people of the 18th district.
And during those meetings, every diverse group will have its own issues. And the issues weren't common to all people from all neighborhoods. And so there would be controversy. And one of the talents that Mickey had, he knew how to listen to people very attentively. Sometimes, like the lady here in the bright jacket, if you were getting a little heated, Mickey wouldn't have a problem getting up, going sit next to you, and not stop you from talking, but just give a closer ear to what you had to say. And believe me, that would be impressive. And Mickey was able to bring about a consensus when other people could never quiet the room. He was able to do that. And so, David, how has your experience working with with Mickey in the past? Now you've been a justice of the peace for how many years? 30 years. He survived on the bench. And I remember when he campaigned, he kind of broke away from Mickey's congressional race, got him a little building on Washington Avenue, and it wasn't on the street. You had to walk way back across the field to get to his little campaign office. But he was relentless. He campaigned and he won. But what did you learn that you've been able to use in your current life?
Well, I think one of the things, it was funny because in '82, when I was in law school, started off as I ran for the legislature like Mickey when I was a third-year law student. And it was an experience where, gosh, do I really want to do this? Because law school's tough and going on and running a campaign, but seats don't come open often. And so one of the first people that I talked to was Congressman Leland. And one of the things that he told me was, he said, I'm running for this House seat that's open. And he said, okay, what all do you need me to do? And I said, do you want to know who's in the race? He said, no, I don't need to know who's in the race. I know you. Regardless of who's in the race, I'm for you. And he helped me and so many people that, he opened a lot of doors. And when I ran and got elected, I had the opportunity to do a lot of things, I think, in Austin as a legislator because of some of the people said, oh, you're a friend of Mickey Leland's. He told me things about you. So that helped. That gave me an entree to folks. And also, I guess, one of the things that always impressed me about him was being able to understand, he came from a household where his mother was a teacher. He worked hard himself, but he was always concerned about those who had less, and that we had a duty and an obligation. And I think this more than anything else, Mickey lived the Judeo-Christian principles of being, I am my brother's keeper. That, you have a duty and an obligation as an elected official to make sure that those who have less are looked after. My favorite part of the Bible, and I think Mickey embodied this, was the Sermon on the Mount. Yeah. And I think he lived that message of making sure he didn't try to enforce you to believe everything he believed, but he believed that we had an obligation to make sure that those who were hungry were fed. And that's where probably more than anything, as a member of Congress, he was known for his activities as being involved in the Select Committee, Congressional Committee on Hunger, and phenomenal work. And if I can tell one story, Virgil, about it, he was so well known for doing it, and he did it, worked addressing hunger, not just in this country where we obviously have areas that have need, but worldwide. And, he was, of course, he died in that mission in Ethiopia. And about 2 years before Mickey died, I was in New York. I was in the legislature. We had a conference, and I had a taxi cab driver. And Congressman Jackson Lee, I know you'll appreciate this, but the work that was done was he did a lot of it quietly, but he was so well known in Ethiopia that this taxi cab driver in New York City asked me where I was from as he was taking my luggage and getting ready. And I said, oh, I'm from Houston. And so, at the time, where was the vice president from in 1987? From Houston, Texas, at the time. But he asked me, he said, do you know Congressman Mickey Leland? And I said, yes, as a matter of fact, I do. I know him pretty well. And he said, he is great. He said, he's done so much in my country to help people. And he went on and on about how much Mickey had done. And it was like he was a royalty in Ethiopia. And I saw films where these kids would come and greet him, and they just, because he did so much to try to address the issue of hunger there. And the taxi cab driver at the end, when we finished, he didn't want to charge me because I said, no, I'm paying you. I said, and the congressman won, if you're in a point where feel you're ahead, and you have extra money, give it to one of the food banks, give it, help those, send money back to folks at home that need it. But that's what he was all about. And it was just, here I was halfway across the country, and someone from halfway across the world, the person he thought was most important from Houston, Texas, was Mickey Lee.
To all our online audience, next we're having Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, but I want to thank David Petronella. And in saying goodbye to you, I'd like to tell you he practices still what he learned from Mickey. He shares the office building downtown with Constable Alan Rosen. And Alan Rosen's people said, Bennett, you know David Petronella? I said, yeah, I know Judge Petronella. He said, he must have a lot of cars in his garage because every week he's got 2 or 3 different cars in his parking space. So one day when I did an interview with him, I couldn't resist. I said, David, how is it you have so many cars in your parking space? I said, the constable's people are just amazed at your collection. And he said, Virtle, it's very expensive to park downtown. So 2 or 3 times a week, I give my parking space to one of my staff so they don't have to pay that day. And that can go to child care or nutrition or what have you. And so he's still that Mickey Leland person that he was that I knew years ago. So thank you for being here and glad you could make it. And I hear you just had a little bit of surgery.
Gallbladder taken out. But I couldn't, that was this week. I just got out of Methodist, but Virtle was putting this together. I had to be here for Congressman Leland. And, we are very blessed now. I know our Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee will be coming up in a moment to continue the traditions, and she's continued the traditions that Congressman Leland, the legacy of the 18th Congressional District. I mean, it is just, and one of the things I have to say, one last thing, I was so glad that our Texas House restored a lot of the historic parts of the 18th Congressional District to keep that constituency involved. And it was not because the Republicans wanted to do it. It was because we had members of the legislature work to make sure that that was done. So I'm very happy that they kept historic parts of the 18th District together as it's been since 1972 when it was first created.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman, very much.
Hold the mic in a little closer. Congresswoman, I remember we were at a union hall one day, and I really didn't know you that well, and we had gotten all these ministers together, and you were running for something at either city council or a judge. I don't remember, but we must have had close to 300 African-American preachers, and it was a big event. Oh, it was for Craig. That's what it was for. It was for Craig. And so we had all these people there, and I approached the congressperson and I said, is it possible we could let Sheila Jackson Lee stand in after we do this first picture? And he said, yes, of course. And so we got a big picture with her and all the ministers showing their support for her campaign at the time. And that's the first time I really had any conversation with the Congresswoman. But we're glad to have you here today. And I want everybody to know Mickey Leland's Congressional Archive is the largest congressional archive on the line, and it gets over 300 hits, 300,000 hits. No, what is it, 30,000 or 300,000? Huh? 30,000 hits every 2 months. That's an enormous amount of people, and mostly from China, Russia, Germany, and then the Washington, D.C. area. And we have the director of the TSU Library Learning Center here today, and she's going to tell you more about the Congressional Archives. But Congresswoman Lee appropriated $400,000 to get the archives digitalized, so it could be online. So part of that money went to Congressman Leland and part to Congressperson Barbara Jordan. So, but as of today, of all the people who served in Congress, he has the largest congressional archives, bigger than John Glenn, bigger than Barack Obama, because when they were in, it wasn't popular to digitize, but it was all done right here in the Barbara Jordan Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs because of the Congresswoman.
Turtle, thank you so very much.
Yes.
Thank you. What an honor to be here this morning and to be able to take this moment to honor Mickey's 77th birthday. What a young man. 77 years in terms of being in our spirit. I'll start again. I'll wait for technology. So while we have this space and we have such friends here, let's everybody introduce themselves. I love it. We're going to get you on. We're getting you on the archives for sure. A living testimony. It's a pleasure. My friend, Howard. Pleasure. Thank you so very much. Anybody else wants to quickly? Oh, yeah. Mm. I'm going to start now. Again, let me start by saying what a pleasure and honor to be here and to be amongst so many people, including Texas Southern University students, and of course the curator, the archivist or digital leader of the wonderful library that reflects both Barbara Jordan and Mickey Leland. Dean, it's a pleasure to be with you. Associate Dean, a pleasure. Students, I know that we will meet. As Mickey had in his life as a member of Congress, I am probably 3 events behind in terms of what we have to do when we come home from Washington. Virgil Bennett is the living historian of all of us. Without his presence, Virgil has really been the storyteller, the truth teller. His knowledge of the Honorable Barbara Jordan, his knowledge of his dear, dear, dear beloved friend Mickey, of which he stayed so closely by, one would say under his wings, and then continued to be the nurturer of the 18th Congressional District. And I must say that as the first map came out, it looks like I was struck by the spirit of Mickey Leland and Barbara Jordan. It wasn't for me a fraudulent drawing of a map. It was an attack on a way of life. It was an attack on the dignity of the 18th Congressional District. It was an attack on the voters, on the neighborhoods, on the history. It was personal. And frankly, I made a commitment to myself that before I would let this district that Mickey Leland represented and loved so much dissolve or to be extinguished, there wouldn't be, and the first time I put this in an open statement, There would be clothes on the ground and blood, because that would be Sheila Jackson Lee. Mickey Leland's spirit struck me that this could not happen. And that's the way Mickey led his life, that injuries, devastation, dismissing, ignoring the pain of people just couldn't happen on his watch. And I imagine that his classmate would say, as a little boy, Mickey was unique and different, because you don't just gain that and pop up as a member of Congress. It really is in you. And I'm glad that Judge Petronella mentioned Mickey's faith, because he did. And I really believe that his faith drove him to be the activist that he was and is in his life. His faith, and of course, his loving mother. For those of us who knew Alice Raines, knew his brother, Mickey loved his family. His mother was his queen, was his guiding force, was his educator, because she was an educator, but she educated those boys at home as well, and was his guiding force. I think that's important to make sure we know about Alice Raines. We loved her. I'm so glad to have been, for her to have been alive during the period after Mickey's death, because we loved her. And of course, his death for her was devastating. He loved his family, always wanted to be a father, and was so excited when his firstborn was born, and he obviously did not live to see the birth of his twins. Loved his wife. But I say all that to say that when he came out of his house, he was Mickey Leland, and he was ready to go. He was ready to make deals. He was ready to interact with the community. He was ready to get things done. He was ready to mentor. One of the things that I think we miss with this Society of Technology, and there are two students here, maybe there are more than one, Mickey had a gaggle of folk hanging around. And we're around, and it's not seen as something to do anymore. Maybe it's not awesome, it's not hip, but it is such an experience to be able to be around people. I was a grown person when I sat in the office of Barbara Jordan. I will still talk about that experience, a grown young person, because it was an amazing experience to be in her office in Washington. You could see her here, but in her office in Washington as a member of the United States Congress. I encourage young people who may be listening. Mickey is 77 and he is gone. But there are people around that you miss because you are, I'm not sure, not embracing and understanding the value of walking history. We understood it. And I understood being around Mickey when he came home in the district. And I certainly did not have the experience of starting in school. But there was a gaggle of young elected officials or people not elected, really, because I wasn't elected, that would gaggle around, use the terminology, Mickey Leland. You wanted to learn. So when Mickey Leland brought the Congressional Black Caucus here, frankly, we thought we had died and gone to heaven, because he brought all these members that we were just in awe. John Conyers, Ron Dellums was here. If I could call them Bill Gray. And some people were saying these numbers, you know, who are these people? Shirley Chisholm. He brought them here, much smaller Congressional Black Caucus. So I don't know if plenty makes people think it's just it's the old shoe. It's just a member of Congress. But it's iconic, not because the person deserves a pedestal to be placed up. It is the walking knowledge. And so we were clamoring just to be in the room. My good friend Charlie Rangel, you can imagine what I thought when I got to the United States Congress, to be with Mickey's friends, and that's what I called them. Charlie Rangel, Mickey Leland, Ron Dellums, they were all eager to say they were Mickey's friends, because they were there in the dark days or the small days or the days when they had to organize and use Bill Clay. I'm going to call all these names. Curtis Collins, who I got to serve with a little bit. Ron, I got to serve with a little bit. John Conyers for a longer period of time. Charlie Rangel. Look at all these names. They walked in that United States Congress. They were, how could I say it? People were like, let me look at you, because there was nothing like them around. nothing like members of Congress. And then Mickey came from, and Barbara came from the Deep South. Barbara was the first, Mickey the second. Since Reconstruction, who wouldn't want to be around? And then he brought this sense of humanitarianism that just filled his soul. Mickey, of course, went to the state legislature. I was a peon and wasn't around anyway during that era, except what I know that my husband, Elwin Lee, worked as an intern during that time in the state legislature. Now, I think Mickey took to things like standing on tables, but they had to get the attention of folk who also looked at them like, who are these people? We've never seen these people in the state legislature since Reconstruction, even at that time. Just try to understand how special Mickey was and how he made himself from a boy out of Fifth Ward, Texas, to the iconic presence in the United States Congress that when I came, people wanted to say they were friends of Mickey Leland. More about the Select Committee on Hunger. It had never been done. There was a Select Committee on Drugs. And then this committee that was done bipartisan, that's a big word, and that was Congressman Emerson from a place far away, Kansas, from Mickey's concept of Houston, Texas, and the nickel. They got together. He was on the Agricultural Committee, but it was really a sense of hunger being an evil that they knew that America had a responsibility to stamp out. We still fight hunger today, but the Mickey Leland Hunger Commission is still very much alive, of which I've been on the board since coming to the United States Congress. It has interns and fellows. It has members of Congress who support it. It gets funding to do work about hunger around the world. And it was his friends in Ethiopia, or from Ethiopia, here in Houston, who found him. If I might, I can say the reason why David Petronello found the son of Ethiopia, because it seemed that they found their way to places like taxis, even to the extent later of owning a bunch of them. You could find taxis around America driven by Ethiopian immigrants. But Mickey Leland made friends and understood Eritrea, and Ethiopia, and South Sudan, Somalia, areas that most people could not even consider. And Mickey was without fear, but Mickey also legislated. And I think it's important for you to know what legislation is. Our time frame in the United States Congress is different from that of the state legislature. It takes years to get anything done. You could file a bill 5 years ago and you're excited about the fact that it was finally signed by the president in its 10th year. It moves slow. And when you come to a time like this, that Mickey, thank goodness, did not see, when there is such a divide, such divisiveness, such lack of understanding, it takes longer. But the one thing about Mickey's era is, as I said, he was fearless, and no one was going to be a person that wasn't a friend. So no matter what your political beliefs were, he was going to find a way to do legislation with you. And so there is a Mickey Leland center in the medical center dealing with air pollution and asthma. Mickey was on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and he worked on health issues. Mickey was big before the Affordable Care Act could even be pronounced to talk about why people didn't have health care. And he found people to work on. Mickey chaired the Congressional Black Caucus. I chaired the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. The 18th Congressional District, though way down here in Houston, Texas, was well known. Then, of course, was his international mission. I already told you there was never a person that was not his friend. There was never a person who was an international person that was not his friend. There was never a person who came from a place of depression and devastation. There was never a person who suffered discrimination that was not his friend and who he did not fight for. And if I offer anything about his spirit and the reason why the world still looks to his archives, because they want to know what makes up America. And the reason why people still to this day continue to admire America are for the persons like Mickey Leland. They always have hope that America will be what she says she is, what that Constitution calls her to be, that ordering a more perfect union or insisting on promoting certain inalienable rights, which was the Declaration of Independence, of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that you can come here and be someone. And with Mickey, you could be someone. I talked about his journeys on the weekend. Well, he was always putting together someone to run for something. So by being part of the gaggle, you were going to get called. And it would be something that you weren't even thinking about. I'm honored that he called me. I know Rodney Ellis is honored to have been called and to have been someone who he worked with. Commissioner Ellis is just leaving out of Atlanta where he was meeting with Martin King III. I wanted you all to know of his love and enduring affection for Mickey Leland. Started working for him in 1980. And he says that he is still working for him, that he's still following him. And during his work, he learned to follow Mickey Leland. And that's what happens to those of us who were around him. We can remember stories. So mine, of course, was being part of the gaggle and getting that call about running for office. And obviously it wasn't for Congress. So he saw things in people that caused them to think of things that they had never thought of. And of course, we fight every day to try to have that kind of spirit. He was, as I said, tough. He took no prisoners. And you learned a lot from that. But I think it's important to know that he was a legislator. He did understand compromise. He did generate legislation. And something that many of you don't know, Congressman Mickey Leland filed the first bill on creating what is now the African American Culture and History Museum in Washington, D.C. I might say, along with the Martin Luther King Monument, the most visited museum and most visited museum under the Smithsonian family. It is unbelievable, the visitors that come to the Smithsonian. They were clamoring during the pandemic for it to be open. I had one of the largest receptions there with about 3,000 people when I chaired the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, because so many people wanted to come and just be inside of that museum. Mickey Leland filed the legislation to establish a slaves museum, a museum to tell the story about slaves. And out of that, tragically, because he did not live, he was not able to pursue it, but it was picked up by John Robert Lewis, who then carried it as a museum of the culture and history of African Americans. Mickey Leland is also in that museum because of his creation of that legislation. And when we debated it, as I was the only member of Congress from here, state of Texas, from this region, to be an original co-sponsor of the museum, having come at that time, but we debated and I insisted that they include Mickey Leland in the story of this museum and made sure that the legislative history would include how he was the foundation of this museum. Legislation is very important. So I ask you to get part of a gaggle of someone in the tradition of Mickey Leland and to make sure that you understand him more than the big bush that he had for a number of years and the good-looking suits and the friendship he had with the Reverend Jesse Jackson, strong, deep friendship, Andy Young, the admiration that Walter Mondale had for him, Jimmy Carter had for him, and the big shoes that he had in national politics, but the big affection that he had for the world and his beloved Ethiopia and the Ethiopian people and all of Africa. He was a giant in his time. I'm glad to have had just a few short years to say that I was part of the gaggle. When I say that, the years were not short, they were long, but I consider them in the context of his life. But I'm glad to have been there in the gaggle, there in the crowd that could follow him around during the weekends that he would come home during his time here, and to be able to, if you will, I think I will end on this note. In those days when Mickey was missing and all of us had our phones, hardline phones, because there weren't many cell phones, we were by the phones because not one of us, not one, ever thought that Mickey would not pop up. Not one. And we waited and waited and waited. That's the kind of strength, determination, presence, aura, kingliness, and greatness that Mickey Leland had in our hearts. We would not accept anything less than Mickey coming back.
Thank you very much. Glad you took time from your busy schedule. Where are you on could you say a little something about the new virus that's hitting? Is that affecting our district yet?
It is fast moving. It is not. It's 12 states that now are infected with the Omicron virus. We will not. I am not a scientist or an infectious disease specialist, but I follow them. Mm-hmm. And so we know that because it has such a high transmittal rate, that it will be here in Texas. That's why I have two major testing events today, one at UMMC and one at Legacy Apartments on the Northeast Side, because I have not stopped testing and vaccines since March 19th, 2020, when this was really pronounced. And so hats off to all of my team that has worked with me, and hats off to my staff. We have done this almost every weekend, and we use the power of our office so that we can go to places where others do not go. But Omicron will come based on the science, and so we advocate for vaccines, children 5 and up, for the Pfizer, adults, and boosters. We're giving them all, but we're also not going to shy away from getting yourself tested. This is a pandemic that will not end because we have such a low percentage of people across the nation that are vaccinated, and then there is a sizable percentage that are unvaccinated, including Texas, which is one of the most unvaccinated states. So we will not end all of this. If there are young people who are looking at this, who are anti-vaccine for what the social media has said to them, you will be in this state. Since we've all lived outside of this state, not state Texas, but this condition, I would argue vigorously, how long do you want to be in this? I would like to be out tomorrow, this afternoon. Give us 95, 98% vaccination. And then, of course, my advocacy in the United States Congress, I hope it's a little bit of Mickey in me or on my shoulder, if you will, is that we must vaccinate the world. We have got to vaccinate Africa. My hat off to South Africa. I sent out a statement saying that South Africa should not be punished. They were straight up. They were honest. They are scientists, have worked with our scientists. They told us they had the Omicron virus. It is spreading like wildfire in South Africa. They are confronting this. Can you imagine what they're having to do? And their folks are not vaccinated because they don't have the vaccine. They also are looking at social media from the United States. And so they're developing a community of anti-vaxxers because they're reading our social media. What are we doing to the world? They need to be vaccinated. Just a few weeks ago, pursuant to Mickey's whole aura, I met with the president of Botswana. He was here to ask for vaccines. They need them. And as someone who's been to almost 53 countries on the continent of Africa, which is something, by the way, when I ran for Congress, that I used that, my commitment to the continent, running right here in the 18th Congressional District, I felt so committed to what Mickey stood for that I used that when I was campaigning for this seat for the very first time, that I was going to be a friend of Africa, sister of Africa. I was going to continue in my work, whether it was Eritrea and Ethiopia and the discourse that is going on, the conflict that is going on in Ethiopia. I'm standing with the Ethiopian people now and will not in any way stand away from them in this fight. I stood with Ghana, with the conflicts in Nigeria to push for democracy. It has to be the ability to be around someone like Mickey Leland, from Sudan to South Sudan, Somalia, Kenya, the genocide that occurred in Rwanda, to be able to stand up against that and to stand for the people rebuilding themselves, the Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But all these different, I just know that if I had not been exposed to Mickey and his exposure to first the wonderful people of Ethiopia, which I have to keep saying. By the way, there's a street named after Mickey Leland in Addis Ababa, right in front of the U.S. Embassy. And he has a statue, a monument there that was created by the friends of Mickey Leland, right in Addis Ababa. That's a pretty big deal, everybody. And you should Google it or get on a plane. When we can get on a plane and find yourself on the continent, you'll never have a more wonderful and amazing experience. Bertel, if I might, in my time in Ethiopia, I did not spend it in Addis Ababa. I went to the coffee fields and the villages. And, I am just eager to be unleashed again, to be able to go and see so many friends. But that is what he symbolized. And here we are today with the pandemic, and we're all like this. And I can assure you, I hope I'm fleeing as much as Mickey would be fleeing, but he would be right there on this issue of getting these vaccines out beyond the boundaries of the United States. To the credit of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, they have sent more vaccines than any other country in the world. And so it has to be a sort of an organized effort that we've got to be able to ensure that vaccines, many of you saw the devastation of India. They were producing vaccines, but it was spreading so fast, the Delta variant, that they couldn't even catch up with it. So please understand, we cannot be calm here in the United States. It hurts my heart when vaccine centers are set up and you're not there. And you need to be there. So Bertel, that is what I think his spirit has done, is to keep people doing what he needs to do.
Well, the Mickey Leland Center is working on hosting an event early next year where Houston, your district, Houston has the largest population of Nigerians outside of Nigeria. There's a major population right here at Texas Southern University. And they have some serious issues. Yeah. But I'd like to point out, we have a guest here. Dula, where are you? There he is. He's a big advocate. He's from Ethiopia. And we're glad you're here, Dula. Is there anything you'd like to offer to the Congresswoman?
I'm going to be.
Oh, you're leaving. Okay.
But Dula, why don't you come up here and take my place? You have not spoken yet? Or you have? Oh, all right. Well, I do know Dula very, very well, and he is. You want to turn this
Yes.
on? I don't know. I do know Dula very well, and he is modest, and he is the leader of and the anchor of the Ethiopian community, and keeping us fixed on the right issues, the right positions, and the positions that Mickey was fighting for when he was alive. Ethiopia's history is obviously thousands and thousands of years old, and it has been and it has the potential to be one of the greatest nations on the continent, greatest nations in the world, and also a proponent of democracy. Dula, my staff, Johannes, is in the government. You remember when Johannes worked for me in Washington. So he is an assistant to the president of Ethiopia. Of course, there's the prime minister and the president, and they are trying to make sure that the government is supported. And so I want to make sure that you know I am supporting the government as we have spoken together for freedom and for democracy. It is a tribute to Mickey. Thank you so much for having me. Let me congratulate this wonderful school, Dean. I have a presentation to make to you. To all of those who are streaming, remember when I said get in the gaggle, find someone, walk alongside of us, volunteer. I'm going to be advertising. Find out what we're doing over the weekend. Get out and do something with us, please. We used to do that and have just a great learning opportunity when we would do it. Thank you. God bless everyone. God bless the school. God bless Mickey's spirit and his family. He rests not in peace as well, but also in power. God bless the United States of America.
Thank you.
My name is Ben Reyes. I was a member of the Texas legislature at the same time Mickey Leland was for city council. He and I were friends all our lives. And I met him when I was a kid over on Lyons Avenue. I used to shine shoes, and he used to work at the Dairy Dream. Could get extra hamburger meat on.
Everybody get in a little closer. Thank you. Yeah.
Hamburgers and get a big malt from Mickey. That's how we first met, and we continued being friends till after I got back from Vietnam. He started running for the legislature, encouraged me to run, and I ran, and we were friends all of his life. One of the things that was really important about Mickey, that Mickey was really Mickey, and that's all he was. He was a person that loved people, and he didn't just go out there and espouse the whole notion that we needed to coalesce as back then it was called the Black-Brown coalitions. He did exactly that. He did it by what he did, of how he acted. He used to get in trouble in the black community because they said, Mickey, you're doing more for the Mexicans than you're doing for us. And he taught me that way. He taught me that in order to live a coalition and make it go is you had to be that kind of person. You had to be that kind of human being. You had to be what you said you were. And I think that's the way he lived all of his life, regardless of whether it was in politics, whether it was in school, whether it was out in the community. And he showed the people in my community by going out and putting up clinics in Port Houston, some of the poorest Hispanic communities, in North Side, Casa de Amigos. And nobody had ever done stuff like that. He did it. He didn't do it because there was any publicity about it. He did it because he was a human being of the world, and he was a person that would really believe in, if we can come together as poor people, as working people, we can achieve a lot more together than we can by ourselves. The story that's probably the most interest about this era that we were involved in, because you had to remember the Texas legislature maybe had 1 or 2 blacks in the legislature, maybe 6 or 7 Mexicans, and they were guys from the valley. They had never met anybody from the cities. The rest were people from the country. And the first day that we went up to the legislature, Craig was driving his Cadillac, had the top down. Mickey was sitting next to him, and I was in the back. And we drove in, and we're driving around the Capitol there, and said, "Man, where should we park?" Craig says, I said, "Park right there, Craig. That sign says for members of the legislature." And he parked. He said, "Yeah, we'll park right by the door." And he parked. And this little security guard, who we found out later they were retired DPS policemen, came up to the door, to Craig's door, and he said, "Hey, boy, damn, don't you know that you ain't supposed to park around here?" He says, so Craig plays along. Craig, intelligent, one of the best lawyers I've ever known. And we played along with him. He said, "No, sir, boss, I just park in here, get to the door, it's closest." He said, "Well, can't you read that sign up over there? It says, members of the legislature only. Now you get your ass across the street over there and find your parking space and rent your place." He said, "Well, boss, I think I is a member of the legislature." And that little old guy shook his head. Then Craig said, "No, all of us is members, all 3 of us is members of the legislature, him and that guy in the back." And that old guy started shaking his head. God damn, the country's going to the dogs. Get him out of here. And he took off. Anyway, the guy quit the next day. And that was our introduction into the Texas legislature. That's how we kind of started. The word got around all over the place. The guy quit, and we made him quit. And we did make him quit because it scared the shit out of him. And that's where it was. And that's what we did. That's where we were. We were not afraid to take them on, and we told them we're not. It's like when that one guy from Midland, Texas, called Symphonia colored, or some crazy ass name, back in the back of the chamber, and Symphonia got up on personal privilege and ripped that boy. He almost cried on the House floor. He's a rich white boy with a lot of oil money from Midland, Texas. That boy damn near cried, and he couldn't stand to look people in the eyes after what she did to him. Chastised him about calling her this, calling her that. The guy quit the legislature too. But we had to do that. We just had to, because they'd never been there. I mean, the only one that ever been there was Barbara Jordan and Curtis Graves. And both of them were gone. Barbara had gone to Congress, and Curtis had run for some lieutenant governor's position or something. So it was just us. But we had help, because we had the Ragsdales from Dallas. We had people from Beaumont, Texas, that were our kind of folks. We had more people from the valley that were different than the kind of the old Mexicans that were the rich Mexicans from the valley that came to the legislature. We had some just regular guys like Carlos Truhan. But I think that we all went in an era where we had to turn the country around. We had to turn the state around. And we went about doing that, not just there. Because Mickey didn't just stop there. Mickey would go on the national level. He'd go throughout the state of Texas. And I think slowly his message that we had to bring our people together. We had to coalesce. We had to work together, because Because separated, we couldn't do nothing. But together, we were a force to be reckoned, whether we were in Lubbock, Texas, whether we were in Austin, Texas, or whether we were in Houston or Dallas. And I think that's what he did. I went to work all over the Hispanic community, including in Los Angeles, California, where they didn't have single-member districts. We created single-member districts. And we thought that whole notion of getting local representation would make the difference. And the single-member district case came out of Texas, White v. Register. And we carried that case all over the country. The guys in Los Angeles created single-member districts at the city, and then they went from that to the school board. Because as you remember back in the days that we started, before we started, I don't think we had but one minority on the school board in HISD, and that was Miss White. And that's because they thought she was white, because she was Miss White. But we never had a Hispanic. My sister was a Harvard PhD, and she got elected, the first Hispanic woman, to the school board. And it took that kind of direct action on our parts. But really all of it was Mickey. All of it was Mickey because he was a thread that held both our communities together. One of the things that was really Mickey Leland, because he was a pharmacist, he was concerned about health care. He worked real hard for community clinics. And you got to understand, community clinics, generic substitutions, HMOs, back in them days was communist. You had to be a crazy communist that wanted to get them kind of things done. But his mind was so far ahead of everybody else. And it was all about helping the most people with the least amount of money. And he was always there. And he fought that generic substitution bill in the legislature. And I swear people thought they walked up to him and called him a communist. And they told me he was crazy, that he's going to turn all that over to the communists. And Lord and behold, all he was trying to do was have access for poor people to the medicines they needed at a lower price. That's all generic substitution was about. That's all HMOs was about. And local neighborhood clinics, he was the architect of all that. Casa de Amigos was the first one. The second one was over at Port Houston, big Hispanic community. That showed you who he was. He didn't run the Fifth Ward. He didn't run the Third Ward. He ran to where he thought he could bring more people together. And he absolutely did that. And what happened after that was that everybody benefited from generic substitutions. Everybody, all poor people in the world benefited from it, especially in this country. He was that far ahead of everybody. He was like 20, 30 years ahead on his thinking about helping people with their health care. You argue about health care, that guy did it. The reason we got neighborhood clinics in Houston, Harris County right now, because he told them, he says, do you want to treat those people in their neighborhood and give them a shot for the flu, or you want them to get pneumonia and go to Ben Taub or go to Jeff Davis back in them days and spend thousands of dollars more? That don't make no sense. And they finally figured he's right. And that's where we got neighborhood clinics. That was good for everybody. It was good for the community because it saved a lot of money. And more than that, it was good for the people because they got well. They were able to be healthy people and productive. They weren't tied up in a hospital somewhere downtown fighting to stay alive. That was Mickey Leland. That's what he was all about. And all those things, he was 25 years ahead of everybody. When all that got done, HMOs, neighborhood clinics, everybody said, oh my God, the greatest thing since apple pie. They didn't understand it. It got through Mickey Leland, and he fought hard in the legislature. Them old country boys were tough on him. And everybody that was anti-communist back in them days beat up on him. But he stood his ground. And you see what we got now. Go out there and look at it. That's Mickey Leland. The congressional race for the 18th Congressional District was really important to me because it was important to Mickey. He wanted to be that leader in the community, not because he wanted to lead in legislation in Congress or he wanted to be a congressman, but because he really felt that if he were in that position, he could bring even more people together. He could take his message all over the world, and he did. And his whole idea was he wasn't just worried about Mickey Leland's neighborhood. He was worried about everybody. It's a tough deal, though, because the neighborhoods. It didn't bother our community. In our community, we loved Mickey Leland, and we was for Mickey Leland, regardless of what he ran for or what he did. And we were that way because he was who he was. He was who he said he was. You looked at him, and that's who you saw. That's what you got. You got that kind of a human being. And we worked our hearts off for him in that race. It was tough. But in the end, he got about 90% of the Hispanic vote. And I think that made a lot of difference in that race. It's tough for him, but he did what he had always done. He said, I'm reaching out to everybody and I'm going to represent everybody. And our community believed him because we'd had years with him in the legislature and we stuck with him. And after the division in the black community, people came together behind him because he was the kind of guy that reached out and brought people in and made the world a better place. Because he did. After he got in Congress, he headed up the hunger committees. And who does that help? All the people. All people struggling like our folks. And we applauded him. We thought it was the greatest thing he could do because that's what he was capable of doing. And we knew he was capable of doing it because he did it here. He never forgot our community. He never forgot our people. And you can go to this day to some of the senior citizen centers and some of the ones that are still out there. Still love him. They still remember him. And that's what, he was really a genuine human being that practiced what he preached. And they were really important because when the granddads and the grandmamas in the community love you like they love Mickey, that goes throughout their communities, throughout their families. And they loved him. We never had a problem with that. We just wanted more, and they wanted more from him, and he tried to give everybody more. So 90% of my community were Catholics. And to find out that he was a Catholic too just made their bond stronger. I mean, because of religion. In our community, religion was a big thing. I mean, just especially if you were Catholic. Back in them days, that's sometimes all we had, but we were really tight with it. They were tight with us. And when they found out Mickey was a Catholic, they loved him even more. I think that the thing that all of us loved about Mickey is that he was genuine. He was who he said he was. And when you got Mickey Leland, you got the